Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right there from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week I dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss the history of it, how it holds up today, and general impressions. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. So if you like the show and can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome. And of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast, and share it with your friends. In case you missed the news and just haven't put together that today is not Tuesday, if you're listening to this the day that it goes live, Disney That D Plus show has been moved from its usual Tuesday release block to Fridays for the time being, just to kind of spread out that nerdy site's content. The current lineup was kind of really front loaded in the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and that was making kind of early week editing for me personally just a little bit hectic oftentimes. So by taking that D Plus show out of Tuesday and pushing it to the end of the week here on Fridays, that kind of just spreads out the workload throughout the week for me. So thank you for sticking with us, and hope you enjoyed the show. No guest again this week, but I'm going to be talking myself about Bend It Like Beckham, which just I saw on the when I booted up the Disney Plus app. It was up there under kind of like in the top slate of things, and I was like, I haven't watched that in a while. And because of the whole Fox deal, it's something I didn't think would be on Disney Plus, but is now on Disney Plus. And so I just wanted to sit down and kind of rewatch and revisit Bend It Like Beckham. So just kind of like another reason I picked it, I guess, is my own personal history with it. I remember being introduced to this film by my sister, back probably maybe early college. I think, yeah, it was either late high school or early college, based on kind of when it came out. I think she saw it in theaters, and probably introduced it to me once it came to like home video. I don't think I saw this in theaters, but I remember in particular, she had a big crush on Jonathan Rhys Meyers at the time, who was of course Joe in this film, and it was fitting because I had a big crush on Keira Knightley at the time. So it was and like both of us had grown up playing soccer. I played it all the way up into high school, and was on like the JV team in high school, but ended up kind of stepping away from soccer as I got more involved in the arts and stuff in high school. And it, like, in part because I didn't think I was going to be good enough when, like, my sophomore year they were going to do away with the JV team and there's really only going to be a varsity team, largely because soccer was kind of the off-season sport for our football players, and so a lot of the football players, to stay active, like, played soccer and kind of just got recruited onto the soccer team. And I was like, well, I'm not gonna stand out against them. So kind of the fact that was happening, and I was getting more involved in choirs and band and stuff like that, just kind of made the decision to transition over to the arts for me. But I've always kind of held soccer near and dear, and I still like, especially in World Cups in recent years, I enjoy just kind of like plopping down, sitting down with a beer or something at a bar and just kind of watching some soccer, or football, as is often kind of referenced here. So yeah, it was a movie that I enjoyed at the time, and I probably really haven't thought too much about in recent years, but it was also probably one of the earlier like independent films that I saw, just because it wasn't, that wasn't kind of my cup of tea necessarily. Growing up, I was probably much more like the big blockbuster films or whatever, or Disney and stuff like that. I wasn't really seeing too much in the way of like these little smaller indie picks that would. We have a movie theater in town that I had growing up, called Camel View. It was like a five screen theater that kind of it existed and was like connected to the big one in the mall that we would go to a lot growing up. It was the art house theater outside of the mall, was Camel View, and this was the kind of movie that would play at Camelview, and I just didn't see too many movies there growing up. It was one of those, like, we always would drive by and see like a whole bunch of movies with titles and names that we just didn't know because they were the more, the more indie kind of pictures. And I didn't really start going to those until, probably, middle college years, 2005, 2006, like when I was getting into theater pretty heavy in college. But Bend It Like Beckham, one of those that I enjoyed, early on. So it was nice to revisit it tonight. History lesson. This was originally released. There's a few different dates I'm going to kind of pull here because as an indie film, it had a varied release schedule. It was originally released in the UK in April of 2002, April 11th, 2002. It was released in Sundance, I think, here in the U.S., or in a limited release in the U.S. in March of 2003, March 12th, 2003, and then it didn't get wide release here in the States until August 1st, 2003, and I think I'll dive into a potential reason for that in a little bit here. Other notable releases that I've kind of pulled in that time period, and this is like big indie kind of films or indie films that I knew about and like had some kind of connection to. One of them that is another movie that I had not thought about in many, many years. It was a film called The Dangerous Lives of Altar Boys. And this one, I don't even remember why I went and saw this movie, but I remember going to one of those art house theaters in town and seeing that movie, Dangerous Lives of Altar Boys, which came out in June of 2002. And it had Kieran Culkin in it. I remember, like, that was the first time I saw him and thinking, like, oh, Macaulay Culkin has a younger brother. Neat. And it was very good, but I couldn't tell you anything about what it was about. I feel like there was like I feel like I remember like a comic book aesthetic to it, and certainly tackling like the lives of altar boys in the early 2000s. It was not shying away from kind of the growing controversies in that realm. Another one that came out around this time that is one of those movies that I think of as like one of the worst movies I've probably ever seen, and just like tore it apart with my friends in college, is a movie called Camp. It came out in July of 2003. And Camp is the first thing I ever saw Anna Kendrick in. She's a very young performer in that, again, in 2003. And I remember my theater friends, like, we watched this at one of our friends' houses and just, like, tore this to shreds over how over-the-top musical theater-y it was. Because it is basically a musical theater camp with, one of the central characters is going through the struggles of, having to kind of confront his homosexuality, while another one is likening his OCD nature and has a whole monologue about how he just like, he can't help but like tackle numbers or something like that in an OCD sense. And it was just like, wow, that is nowhere near a comparison to, the struggles that somebody who's, had to live a closeted life their whole life is dealing with. And it was just like, it presented as like this main character is being so brave by talking about, and being open with his OCD-ness. And it was like, what, like, not trying to discourage OCD, but like nowhere near the same kind of like psychological tolls, I feel like. And I just remember like, yeah, we just tore this movie apart, because like Anna Kendrick was, I think, the only real thing that like stood out as like a really good performance in there. It's another one I haven't thought about probably since like 2005 or 2006, since I saw it and we just kind of like tore it apart on a theater friend's couch. But certainly another one that popped up in my head on this. And then lastly, the one of the big ones that I pulled in here in terms of like indie films of this time was Lost in Translation. Came out September 12th, 2003. Of course, the Bill Murray film, and the film that probably kind of really shot Scarlett Johansson's career into another level. It was also, I feel like, a re-burgeoning of Bill Murray's career. I feel like he'd kind of gone away for a little while, and this was him, coming back into a different scope. Like, this is what created like modern Bill Murray that we get, that we would later get in like all the Wes Anderson films and stuff like that. Anyway, runtime here of Bend It Like Beckham is an hour and 52 minutes. In the Fox Searchlight timeline of things, because again, this was not a Disney film, this is something that Disney acquired through the recent Fox merger. There are a lot of Fox Searchlight films. Most of them I didn't recognize, so I didn't do the normal thing I do here of like, here's the movie that came out before and here's the one that came out after. But some notable ones that caught my eye, that I imagine will not be appearing on Disney Plus anytime soon. Well, maybe one of them will. But Super Troopers had come out February 15th, 2002. 28 days later, came out June 27th, 2003. Club Dread, February 27th, 2004, and Napoleon Dynamite, the only one that I guess could really probably of these four be considered for Disney Plus, if it's not already kind of being considered for it. That came out June 11th, 2004. A little bit of the roll call here. The director here, Gurinder Chadha. I didn't recognize too much of her stuff, but I did remember specifically while watching this movie, I was like, this seems like that movie I saw trailers for last year. I didn't end up seeing it, but I saw trailers for this movie about this Indian kid in the 90s, maybe, really falling in love and trying to identify and through the lens of Bruce Springsteen music. And like, he makes this pilgrimage to Jersey to, follow Bruce Springsteen. And the movie is called Blinded by the Light. And sure enough, Gurinder Chadha also directed and wrote Blinded by the Light. So that's kind of what she has been up to lately. She's also, again, the writer on this, as well as Blinded by the Light. One of the other credited writers here, Gurjit Bindra, did not really have anything else to their name, so couldn't really pull anything in that. And then the third credited writer on the project, Paul Maeda Burgess, is the partner to Gurinder Chadha, and also has worked on a lot of the same projects, including, of course, Bend It Like Beckham and Blinded by the Light. Starring a couple of the kind of key figures here, you have Perminder Nagra playing Jasminder, who would go on from this to be on ER between 2003 and 2009. She was a very featured, prominent role in there. She also had a prominent role in the James Spader TV series The Blacklist, as well as a minor role that I remembered as kind of like I was looking this on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. She plays kind of a senator when the like Inhumans really start ramping up in like season 3 or 4 or something like that. She plays a senator that is basically like in public she's on this like rampage against the Inhuman threat and S.H.I.E.L.D's kind of involvement in it, and then you find out throughout, spoilers for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. if I recall correctly, that she's dealing with a lot of this because her brother is in an Inhuman cocoon, and she's having to kind of like deal with the duality and reality of that. You also have Keira Knightley here, of course, playing Jules, and this is why I imagine it probably ended up getting a wide-scale release there in late 2003, because in between when this film was originally debuted in the UK and that kind of release in 2003, Keira Knightley shot to superstardom with Pirates of the Caribbean. So suddenly Fox Searchlight has this smaller indie film that maybe they can make a whole bunch of bank off of, really kind of putting it out there as like, hey, come see, you loved her as Elizabeth Swann, come see her in this film as well. So that's probably, a prominent reason that this kind of really ended up doing as well as it did, and ended up getting that like wide scale release, as opposed to being like a just a festival darling or something like that. But of course, Keira Knightley, as we touched on in the Pirates of the Caribbean episode we did a few weeks ago, also has gone on into things like Love Actually and King Arthur and Pride and Prejudice and stuff like that. Jonathan Rhys Meyers, as I mentioned earlier, plays Joe here, kind of the soccer coach. It's weird because of how Jonathan Rhys Meyers is like ingrained in my head through my sister's like crush on him from 17 years ago. So I feel like in my mind he's done so much more, but when I went and looked at his IMDb, he doesn't really have too many, prominent credits to his name. But of them that does have out there, he was in Mission Impossible 3, and then he also one of his probably most prominent role there was as the king in The Tudors, that series for a few years, and then later on he had a recurring role in the Vikings TV show as well. But yeah, just kind of like the disconnect between me thinking he's like a big crazy superstar because my sister loved him so much and was going on and on about him for a couple years there, in my early college days, I guess. Just like it's imprinted in my head that he was like this big deal and doing all this crazy stuff, and his IMDb is pretty short on the on that side of things. Annapump Kaur plays Mr. Bamra, Jess's dad in this. He is a Bollywood icon, but a couple things kind of in the Western world that he's also well known for. He was in Silver Linings Playbook a few years back with Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence, as well as he played Kumail Nanjiani's father in The Big Sick, in that film, kind of based on Kumail and his wife Emily Gordon's like real life kind of romance, that story a few years back. And then lastly, in here we have Archie Punjabi playing Pinky Bamra, aka Jess's sister, who had a good long run there on The Good Wife from 2009 to 2015. A little bit of trivia for Bend It Like Beckham here. Annapump Kaur again played Jess's father here, as well as he would go and play Perminder Nagra's father on ER during her stint on that show as well. So that was a fun little kind of cross casting, I guess. Perminder Nagra was worried that the scar on her leg would prevent her from getting the role of Jess, but instead the scar, as well as kind of the story behind it of was it making beans on toast, ended up being worked into the script. 20th Century Fox marketing suggested that they should maybe change the title of the film from Bend It Like Beckham to Move It Like Mia, after Mia Hamm. There was concern that while bending is a pretty common, understood terminology in the UK, that it wouldn't really translate across the pond. We didn't really talk about soccer, much, period, but let alone like talking about some bending it. So they were like, well, Mia Hamm, people recognize Mia Hamm as a name, so maybe we can tie the marketing to that. But Gurinder Chadha objected, and the original title stayed as is. This is something I didn't know about, but also kind of tracks given the state of musical theater in the last few years. But a West End musical version of the film opened at London's Phoenix Theatre on June 24th, 2015, and ran for 9 months. And there's a couple things interesting about that. Phoenix Theatre it always is a fun connection for me because I worked for Phoenix Theatre here in Arizona, in Phoenix, Arizona, our kind of big musical theater company. And oftentimes the SEO between our theater and the London Phoenix Theatre would confuse some patrons who would be trying to buy tickets for one or the other. But also, if I recall correctly, I went on a Europe trip after graduating high school in 2003. Summer of 2003, me and a bunch of like classmates went to Europe for 3 weeks with a couple of kind of the teacher chaperones from my high school, as like a graduation thing. And one of our like pieces of our itinerary was going to see a musical on London's West End. And I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, we all went and saw The Lion King at, I believe it was Phoenix Theater. It might have been the Lyceum Theater, though, now that I think a little bit more about it. But whatever. But the fact that a musical version of this had been made was interesting to me, but also not at all surprising to me, because I've seen or have heard about musicals in recent years of things like Billy Elliot or Kinky Boots, and that it's tackling films from the last 15, 20 years, kind of one of the big things on Broadway in recent time has been like, hey, let's try and like take that movie that's a known property and let's put it on stage. Let's try and capitalize on that. They've even done it with like the Rocky musical or the Bodyguard and stuff like that. It's a very common thing that has been occurring in recent years. But I had not heard of a Bend It Like Beckham one. I'm guessing it didn't make it stateside or to Broadway. So it was just kind of here on the West End. Thought it was interesting. Another little bit of trivia. Jess wears number 7 here, the number of Beckham, the number Beckham wore for England as well as Manchester United, and Jules wears the number 9 in honor of Mia Hamm. The film grossed $76.5 million off of a $6 million budget. So, again, I think a lot of that was fueled probably by the, sudden boom in popularity for the performance of one Jules, a.k.a. Keira Knightley, on there. Anyway, does the film hold up? I was surprised by how much I kind of thought this film held up. Obviously, it is dated in terms of like the soccer references that are being made, but really, if you swapped out like Mia Hamm references for Megan Rapinoe and Beckham references for Messi or something like that, and just kind of like modernized some of those, I think you could still tell pretty much the same kind of story. I think there would still be a story there around like a person having to kind of like fight this conflict between the restraints that their culture might want to put on them, as well as versus like their dreams and whatnot. But yeah, especially in light of the meteoric popularity that the U.S. team had last year, again with Megan Rapinoe and kind of the U.S. or the World Cup, their dominance in the World Cup last year. I remember like seeing and watching one of those the finals games last year. I think there's definitely like a lot of resonance still behind this kind of story. Some favorite moments and scenes that I had from this film. I really like, as I was watching it, I was thinking back to how this is probably one of the biggest representations of like Indian heritage and culture I've seen on the big screen. It's just not something I personally see depicted all that often. And so the idea of this, being something that I saw 15, 16 years ago, is fascinating to me, because it's something, again, I haven't thought about this movie too much, and I probably haven't thought about like the details of that, but still so many of those kind of like visuals and the familial aspect of the Indian culture that's put on display here. The families all kind of just crowding into the tiny London flats, or even the wedding itself, and kind of having Bollywood-esque kind of performers out there, and everybody really getting into the music and songs and stuff. Is I think a celebration of that kind of culture, but also you see, I think, through the director kind of the lens of the potentially restrictive nature of that culture. The idea, the things that Jess is fighting about. Not only like Jess even kind of says in the film like her getting to play soccer is enough of a leap for her parents, who are very devout Sikhs, and having to kind of deal with that is like one thing. The idea of her, yes, they're moving away from arranged marriages and stuff, but the idea of her being with somebody who, like a Caucasian, a white man like Joe, is unheard of, and she's not really willing or ready to like pick that battle yet. Obviously that changes by the end of the film, but like that idea, I think, is something that clearly it seems to me that the director is it's a story that the director wants to tell and wants to kind of celebrate her heritage and tradition, while also acknowledging maybe it's not necessarily flaws, but kind of need to change and progress with the times and recognize that, the world is becoming a wider, a wider community, and we can't just kind of hold to the past and hold to tradition forever. But yeah, like even going back and rewatching it now, I like it's unfortunate, and I'm sure I know back when he was doing that Wannabe Film Class, Ben would occasionally talk, and I think even in the final episode he talked about how he loves Bollywood and stuff. It's not something I've ever really found myself kind of drawn to, so I've never seen Bollywood in a big proper grand sense, but honestly, like the like other film interpretations that I've seen kind of like cross over to the Western mainstream, like that celebrate that heritage or show off that heritage. I mean, a couple of the big examples I guess I could have is I know Aladdin, kind of the 2019 live action Aladdin last year, kind of plays with the idea of Agrabah as like a mixture of Indian and maybe other Asian kind of heritage and cultures. But like that's a very Disneyfied version of things, so I wouldn't necessarily count it so much. And then I really didn't. I remember seeing the trailers and stuff for Blinded by the Light, but I did not actually sit down and watch Blinded by the Light. So I'm hard pressed to think of other big depictions of kind of Indian culture apart from something like The Big Sick, where Kumail Nanjiani, coming from a Pakistani background, has a very similar, but on the other side of the coin, given the kind of the schisms between India and Pakistan in the last 100 years, but still a lot of the same kinds of things I think are raised in that, and the idea that his whole family wants him to find a nice Pakistani girl, and he ends up finding Emily. It is a similar kind of shock to the system. So I guess that would probably be the other big Western media that I can like really think of and identify on that front, as well as I talked about this maybe on That Nerdy Site show a couple weeks ago, but Doctor Who, they did an episode in one of the Jodie Whittaker seasons about partition, and basically when the borderlines got drawn between India and Pakistan, and that was a kind of an eye-opening episode for me, because it was not a piece of history I was overly intimately familiar with or anything like that. So, but yeah, seeing that heritage kind of celebrated here on screen is something that stands out for me, and as a middle-class white guy here in the States, is definitely something that I appreciate that I was exposed to that all those years ago, and I appreciate that I can still see something like that, and become innately empathetic to the culture and the struggles on all sides of that equation, is something that I cherish, especially in our ever volatile kind of culture society right now. It's nice to see this kind of depiction of it all. Other elements that I love about this film, I love the friendship between Jules and Jess that forms over their love of football. I wish it didn't have to dip in the middle there with them falling out over Joe, but I understand from a narrative storytelling structure that you need kind of that additional little interpersonal conflict for Jess to overcome, as well as and Jules has to have something to kind of battle against there, as opposed to it just being about Jess versus her family and her culture and her heritage. So I appreciate that it resolves itself and they end up stronger than ever kind of as a result. That said, I do appreciate all of the wonderful like comedic little mistaken moments that the Jules and Jess relationship causes in Jules's mother, notably well, I mean just in the film as well, like the idea that Jules and Jess are hanging out and somebody mistakenly sees them and thinks Jess is out there kissing a white boy on the streets of London, um, is funny to me. But also when Jules and Jess have their fight in Jules's house, and Jess is like Jules's mom is making tea and is ready to like take it upstairs or whatever, and she hears them fighting and just kind of has that, like, you see the reaction on her face. You don't see the fight from Jules and Jess's perspective. You hear it, and you see Jules's mom just kind of like this is not a tea time kind of thing. I should not be interrupting this for tea. So she like walks back down the stairs, and then she also starts like creating the wrong image in her head of thinking that they're the two of them are in a relationship and are breaking up, and that Jules is a lesbian, and and what that means to her mom kind of thing, is a fun little kind of like farcical element to the story, that ultimately culminates there when they kind of crash the wedding, and Jules has to basically say, like, no, I'm not a lesbian, mom. Like, that's not what this is. We were fighting over a boy. We were fighting over Joe, our coach. But also, if I was a lesbian, it's not that big of a deal. And all of that kind of coming together. All that was great. As well as I also loved, still on kind of Jules's mom, I loved the journey that Jules's mom kind of even makes in this movie, from going from like wanting to get her daughter like inflatable boobs to help like fill out her shirts or something like that, all the way to accepting that she loves soccer, and the idea that if Jules's mom does not understand or find a way to understand and appreciate soccer, she will lose that relationship with her daughter. So like the scene of the dad teaching her the offsides rule at the dinner table or whatever, is just a lovely heartwarming moment, and it does a great job kind of mirroring even the Jess's father kind of accepting that the only thing that's going to make his daughter happy is seeing her out there on the soccer field. And he of course has that that past connection to cricket, so he gets to kind of see his own old dreams live on through his daughter's passion for football there, and that's just a nice little thing. And I also love the nice little ending beat of them playing cricket out there on the fields of their neighborhood, and I'd forgotten that Jonathan Rhys Meyers, Joe, is out there playing cricket with the dad to give the impression that they are more accepting, and Joe has maybe become a part of their lives while Jess is overseas there at school. So yeah, I really enjoyed sitting back down and watching this. I feel like it does maybe dip a little bit in terms of like pacing a little bit way through the movie. Like I remember hitting pause at some point and seeing that there was still like half the movie left and being like, wow, I feel like I was maybe 20 minutes from the end of what I thought I'd remembered of the film, and I was not. So yeah, really enjoyed it. Also, as young Trevor that had a big crush on Keira Knightley at the time, kind of thing. Her outfit at the club scene, I remember, was something that probably stayed in my head a lot all those years ago. Her very loose fitting like club outfit, where you basically see almost all of her back, kind of thing. I was just like, oh yeah, that's young Trevor had a crush on that, definitely. So yeah, lots of fun there. Ultimately, I give Bend It Like Beckham here an A, solid A. It's a great film. I think it has some great messages behind it, and certainly still holds up to this day. So check it out on Disney Plus if you have not already. I think it's a really fun one. It does, there are definitely. It's definitely not a high definition movie, and there was a lot of moments where like I thought that like I thought my streaming was like staggering or something like that, but I think it's really just how some of the action scenes were shot is, I think, like it basically has like frame rate dips, to speak in like a gaming parlance or whatever. But still, great movie. Check it out. There on Disney Plus. Bend It Like Beckham. Extra credit, other suggestions if you like this one. A lot of live action stuff here. Films called The Ice Princess. No idea what that was about. Go figure. Seems to be about figure skating. The Princess Diaries with Anne Hathaway. That one I recognized. Freaky Friday. There are a lot of Lindsay Lohan movies on this. Freaky Friday, the live action, or the Lindsay Lohan Freaky Friday was in there. Rip Girls, which looked to be like about surfing maybe. Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen. 10 Things I Hate About You, which I did not know was on Disney Plus. But that's definitely one I'm going to have to check out at some point because I love 10 Things I Hate About You. And then lastly, the Lindsay Lohan version of The Parent Trap is also one of the Disney Plus recommendations from these. Nothing else, no extracurriculars. I mean, I've been watching a little bit more of Marvel's Earth's Mightiest Heroes, or Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, that I've done the last couple episodes on. Watched probably most of the rest of season 1 of that, but didn't feel the need to really devote another episode to that series. But I'm still chipping away at it and enjoying it. It's good background fodder for playing the Avengers game. That's going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you for joining me as I discussed my kind of thoughts and impressions on Bend It Like Beckham and revisiting that gem from my definitely early college years. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter. You can follow all of us over on That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site, or you can go to thatnerdysite.com for all of the latest from us. If you liked what you heard, once again, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, and all that fun stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you for joining me. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.